Hello, everybody. I'm Liz Eggleston, and I run Course Report, which is a resource for choosing the right bootcamp for you. This is my one shameless plug. I do it in all of our videos, but you can use Course Report to research the best coding bootcamps and data science bootcamps as well, all over the world. And as you're researching those data science bootcamps, you may notice that even though you'll learn a lot of Python during a data science bootcamp, you actually need to know a little bit of Python before you even apply. So in past webinars, and we will link to those in the description below this video, we've dug into how to choose between Python and R, how much math you need to know for data science. And in this webinar, we're going to talk about what Python is actually used for in data science and exactly how much Python you need to know before you start at a boot camp. So our guest today is Kim Fessel. Thanks so much for joining, Kim. And Kim is a senior data scientist and an instructor at Metis, which is an online data science bootcamp. We'll talk about that in a second. So Kim, you are one of our favorite experts. You joined us last year to talk about the level of math that someone would need to know for data science. And I can't wait to pick your brain again. So thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
So we're going to share some slides as we go along so that you can kind of follow along, and I'll post these slides along with this video and a transcript on our blog afterwards. But let's get started. So first of all, just tell us about your background, Kim, and what you do at Metis. How did you get into data science?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, I'm a senior data scientist and instructor at the Metis Immersive Data Science Bootcamp. My background is primarily in math. I earned my PhD in mathematics at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. But because I was studying applied math, I've actually been coding for about 15 years. When I decided to realign my career toward data science back in 2015, I decided to pretty much take up Python exclusively. I switched over to Python and I haven't really looked back. So I'm really excited to talk about Python today.
And you've been teaching at Metis for about 2 years now, but the last time we spoke, Metis had campuses in New York, Chicago, San Francisco, and today Metis has moved fully online. So what's been the biggest change for you in the last few months moving online?
Yeah, I mean, like all businesses, we really had to reevaluate our business model when this year's pandemic hit. Luckily for us, we actually already had an online offering when businesses were forced to go virtual back in March. So for us, honestly, I've been a little bit surprised at how smooth the transition has been to move everything online. And there's a couple of things that I actually prefer, I think are better online. For example, all of my students now get a front row view of everything I'm doing. I can demo code, they can see exactly what I'm doing right on their computer screens. So there's definitely been some differences. For example, I don't have a whiteboard anymore to write on, but I just hook up, my tablet and use a stylus. And, we've found a lot of different creative solutions to continue providing really the same level of service. So.
Cool. Well, let's dive in because we're talking about Python today. So for total beginners, what is Python, Kim?
You mean besides a giant scary snake?
I know, right? So many names in tech.
So joking aside, really to put it quite simply, Python is one of the world's most popular programming languages. And I would be really surprised if there was a developer or a data scientist out there who hadn't really heard about Python before, because it's just that popular. And there's a couple of hallmarks about the Python language that make it so popular. One is its very simple syntax. And so if you're brand new to coding, syntax is just the words and symbols that we use in order to have a computer program work. And so, the words and symbols that you use in Python are very intuitive. They're basically English words, if, else, and, etc. So I think that's been one of the reasons why Python's gotten so popular. It also supports various different paradigms, but most people would describe Python as an object-oriented programming language, which just means that everything you create in Python is an object. And different objects can have different properties, and you can operate on different objects in different ways. So thinking about each thing you create as an object is kind of an interesting component of Python. And the other really awesome thing about Python is that it integrates really well with other software components. So this is why, it's a general purpose language that you can really build a full end-to-end pipeline, starting with data cleaning, a model, building that straight into production. This is another reason why I think Python's gotten so popular.
And you mentioned that Python is one of those popular programming languages. For this webinar, we're going to focus on how Python is specifically used for data science. But what all can Python actually be used for? It seems pretty broad.
You're totally right. I mean, I think the question is, what can't it be used for, right? It's just so widely accepted. I would say here are a couple of key places that you might see Python. Web development is one, especially for people who are developers or maybe engineers, but even data scientists who want to do web scraping or mock up an app, something like that can all be done in Python. Automating reports. I'm starting to see a lot more of this. People who are analysts or even product managers, if you need to make the same Excel report every single week, you could actually have Python help you create that and save a lot of time. You see Python a lot in finance and business, of course, for, again, reporting, but also predictive models, and even academic research. So back when I was a postdoctoral fellow back at Ohio State University, some of my colleagues were using Python to create simulations, so to study various different behaviors, but do that with a computer.
And you mentioned academic research, and I feel like we can't talk about Python without talking about R, which I think of as kind of the language for academic research. In 2018, I just read that 66% of data scientists reported using Python every day, which makes it the #1 language for data science. Why do you think that Python has overtaken R in the past, 5 or so years?
Yeah, actually, 5 years ago, it might have been just the opposite, that R was maybe a little bit more popular 5 years ago. I mean, there's a couple of reasons that I think Python's kind of taken off. Definitely because it's a general purpose language. And by that, I mean, it's not just for data scientists, not just for academics, but web developers and everybody else can also use it. It makes it easy to collaborate across your organization. So I think that's one reason why people choose to use Python, so that they can communicate with other people. Again, the simple syntax. I mean, the Python syntax is very nice and simple. But the other kind of reason, R is really kind of rooted in academic research, like you just mentioned, and statistical models. In fact, I would say that R statistical packages are maybe even a little better than Python still today. But Python has deep learning and has very structured ways to do machine learning and deal with larger amounts of data and those kinds of things. So I think because people have kind of been shifting more to the deep learning paradigms and those kinds of things, it's just been shifting just a little bit more toward Python. And then, of course, like I mentioned, that so many people are using Python that you can use it in production, use it at your company in production. And the other thing, R used to be better for data visualizations, but I think Python's been catching up there lately. There are a couple of really nice packages to do visualizations in Python now. So.
Cool. That is actually a very clear reasoning for why Python is more important, not more important, but maybe more popular now. So because Python is used for so many different different fields and different purposes, if we're just going to focus on Python for data science, then what parts of Python should we be focusing on, really learning?
Yeah. Now, I mean, really with any field, of course, you have to get the fundamentals down first before you can move on to more interesting things. So I would definitely say starting with the fundamentals, understanding what data types are. And this is just, integers or strings or floating point numbers, understanding how all of those are different. That's kind of the first step. Then moving on to different constructs like loops and conditionals. Eventually, once you've got those fundamentals down, you want to move on to understanding how to manipulate data. So this could be reading data into your Python program and then doing some kind of computations on it, cleaning it up, and then maybe even writing it out to a CSV file, something like that. You'll want to understand exactly how you can manipulate data, because that is a huge part of a data scientist's job. Once you've got the fundamentals and the data manipulation down, you can move on to the fun part, which is the algorithms, building models, maybe even creating your own models, understanding data structures, those kinds of things. That's going to be kind of the bread and butter of a machine learning data scientist's job. And then, of course, data visualizations, which is one of my favorite things about data science. There are various different libraries in Python that can help you do that, but this is a really important step just for understanding your data and, of course, communicating your results to other people.
When you refer to libraries and packages, are those kind of interchangeable terms?
Yeah,
Okay,
they are.
cool. Good to know. And is Python something that you can learn as a first language? Is it easy for beginners to learn, or are we talking about this being kind of a second or third language after you've learned like JavaScript or Ruby on Rails, something like that?
I actually think Python is an excellent first choice for several of the reasons I've mentioned previously, but definitely the simple syntax. I mean, you're really not going to find such a popular programming language that also has such simple syntax. And like, it will really help you as a beginner to get off the ground running, quicker, So I think that it's a great first choice. Python is very flexible in that you can use it to do just about anything, which is nice. And it's also forgiving. And what I mean by that is just that Python will try to interpret what you mean. So I've got a little example here. Let's say we wanted to add together two words like school and house. The way that we add together two words is just using the plus symbol, right? Which is exactly maybe what we would conceive of, just add those together. So Python syntax and the fact that it's forgiving for the different data types, really helpful for beginners. And I would definitely say Python is one of those places where there's plenty of room for growth. I personally am still learning something new about Python every day. So there's plenty of ways to get better and to improve your code.
Okay, so I was just looking at Metis's Python for Beginners course, which you would obviously do before you did the immersive, but it says that graduates of that course will be able to write basic Python code. So I'm curious, I'm wondering if we can jump into that. Like, what is basic Python code and what level of Python would someone know before they applied to Metis or any data science bootcamp?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a couple of fundamentals that you really want to get down before you move on to something more complicated. And so those basic parts of Python, definitely data types, which I've mentioned a couple times, but also data structures, things like what is a list, what is a dictionary, those kind of types of constructs. You'll also want to know at least these three basics. So conditionals, which are basically just true and false tests. You'll basically have some kind of input, you will test it against a condition, and then if that test happens to be true, you'll execute one block of code. If it's false, you might execute a totally different block of code. So it's really just kind of a gatekeeper, is it true or false? Loops are another really big part of the fundamentals of Python. And this is just repeatable code. Anytime you need to repeat the same actions on many different items in a group, you might write a loop for that. So this would just execute over all the different elements in your group of inputs to produce some kind of standard outputs. And then the last thing that you would definitely want to have a grasp on are functions. And functions are really nice bits of reusable code. Basically, you want to perform the same, type of calculation at various points in your code. So if you write a function, you can reuse that bit of code later on anytime you want the same sort of output.
Cool. Okay, could you maybe give us an example of what Python code might look like in data science? Like maybe show us what a conditional statement looks like in Python, since that's the example here.
For sure. Yeah, I think this is a great time to just take a look at some of the Python code. I've been mentioning over and over how simple it is. Let's actually look at some, right? So this is an example of a conditional statement. And we have two different panes here. One of them is the actual Python code you would write. And the other one is like a graphical representation of what Python is really doing. So if I'm starting over on the code, the first line there says x equals 4. And this does probably exactly what you would imagine. Anytime I refer to x later on, I'm really referring to the number 4. So it just sets that assignment up. Then the next line of the code says if x is bigger than 0. So I'm really just testing, is X bigger than 0 or not? In this case, 4 is bigger than 0. So because I've passed that if statement, I've checked off the box, I move into the code that's directly below the if, which says to print out the word positive. And so I do that. I basically just follow along the flow chart that you see on the right, and I move into the side where, yes, X is bigger than 4, or excuse me, bigger than 0, and I print out the word positive.
And so what if that if statement fails?
Definitely. So if we had a different kind of input, for example, the number -2, now -2 is not bigger than 0. So what the if statement now checks is, well, is this true? And basically that fails. So for anything that fails, we drop into the else statement. Really just in plain English, anything else, right? So we drop into the else statement, and that would mean we take the path to the right, which would print out the words negative or 0.
It does seem like very easy to read. It reads like English almost.
Yeah, exactly.
So is this a type of question that someone would expect to get like in the Metis application and the interview process?
Yeah, I would say you'd definitely want to at least be able to do this. Maybe write, even a little bit more complicated conditional statement. But yeah, some sort of being able to check inputs against some true or false statement and then perform various actions depending on if that was true or false.
And so are y'all doing all of that online right now, like doing that remotely during the application process?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, our applications have mostly been online, I think, for quite some time. So you would fill out an application and it would come with a coding challenge, and you would actually have to write your own code. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So logistically, I think honestly, one of the biggest hurdles for a beginner can just be like setting up your computer. I once did a weekend-long coding workshop, and the first few hours were dedicated to just setting it up. So what should someone do to set up their computer to start learning Python?
Yeah.
It seemed very basic, but I think
no,
could
that
be
is
really
so
helpful.
true. Oh, the installations, right? They're tough sometimes. So I have good news for people that are worried about that. If you are on a Mac, if you're using a Mac, you already have Python. It's really nice. Macs come with Python pre-installed. All you'd really have to do is open up your terminal application. It'll look like a little window. You'll open up terminal, you'll type the word Python in lowercase letters, hit enter, and you're ready to do Python code. You can do the example we just looked at and test it out. So that's the good news. If you're not on a Mac, or even if you are, we often recommend to our students to install Anaconda. So Anaconda is really kind of an all-purpose package that comes with a lot of good things. For one, it is available for both Mac and Windows, so it doesn't matter what you're using. When you install Anaconda, you're actually also installing a lot of the common libraries that data scientists use. So you'd already bypass the step of installing other things by just installing this one thing, which is really helpful. Anaconda also comes with something called Jupyter Notebook. And this is a really great tool for beginners to use. So because it comes with Jupyter Notebook, you can also then use the Anaconda Navigator to launch a Jupyter Notebook directly by just clicking a button. So we definitely recommend this for people who are coming in. Even our Python for Beginners course will have them download Anaconda.
That is super helpful. And you mentioned libraries and Jupyter Notebook. I want to dive into both of those things. I mean, just in my research and in listening to you talk about Python in the context of data science, it seems like libraries are super important. Are there Python libraries that you would learn in order to like specialize in machine learning or data visualization? Or maybe you could just give us an example of some Python libraries that beginners could start with.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I know I've been mentioning it many, many times. It's hard to talk about Python without talking about the libraries. So if you're totally new to Python, a library is basically just a collection of saved code that someone else has written for you. And so that's why we like to import various different bits of code so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to do everything on your own. You can leverage what somebody else has written. So that's the really nice thing about libraries. If you're a total beginner, some libraries that you might want to start with, random is a really nice one. That will help you generate random numbers, which can be interesting. You could build your own little game or something with that. You could import math is another nice library. That one's going to give you access to all kinds of math functions, square root, cosine, sine, all those kinds of things. Sys is another nice one that will help you interface with your computer, or collections, which gives you access to additional data structure types within Python. So all of those are really great ones for beginners. Once you progress into data science proper, after the fundamentals, the first library that we have our students learn and really dive into is called Pandas. And Pandas is the library that you would use for data wrangling and data manipulation. So you can read data in, change it, look for missing values, all those good things, write data out. That's going to be a really important library, as well as NumPy, which is one that will help you do really fast computations. So it'll speed up all the different calculations you're doing. And actually, Pandas uses NumPy under the hood for some of its calculations. So it's nice to see they're all, kind of interconnected as well. As far as machine learning, when you really get into the bulk of, let's say, the immersive data science bootcamp, you'd be really leveraging scikit-learn pretty heavily. Some people also call this sklearn, same thing. This one's got all of the great algorithms you'll want to use for regression and classification and unsupervised learning, all of that within this package. And then, of course, data visualizations. Two of the most common ones here are called Matplotlib and Seaborn. Those will both be able to help you produce some really nice visuals.
Cool. And then the other things, you'll get these when you download Anaconda, but the other thing you mentioned when you download Anaconda would be Jupyter Notebook. And I feel like we've just been seeing Jupyter Notebook become so much more popular in the curriculum at a lot of data science boot camps. So why is it important to learn to use an IDE, and you can explain what an IDE is, like Jupyter Notebook when you're learning Python?
Oh man, yeah, Jupyter Notebook is super critical for two reasons in the learning space. One, it helps students understand what their code is doing instantaneously. So the Jupyter Notebook, you'd basically be writing small blocks of code in cells and then executing that code immediately. So you would know, this would give you instant feedback, like, did I have an error in my code? You'd know that immediately. Or did it return something nonsensical that I need to change how this function works? And so that instant feedback allows you to do a lot more experimentation and to just learn really quickly, like, oh, that was a mistake, right? It's better to know earlier than later. So that's really nice. The other really awesome thing about Jupyter Notebooks, you can actually write in Jupyter Notebooks with text. You can include like a little message to yourself. Here's what this code does. Here's why I did X, Y, Z. You can write a bulleted list of here are the steps I'm trying to follow, whatever you want. So you can add a lot of text or even images. And as an instructor, that images part is really critical. If I want to show my students visually what is this code doing, I can include an image for them, and now they can make the connection between the code and some kind of visual. So all of that makes Jupyter Notebooks really critical for the education space.
It seems like it would be really important for like building projects and like even just turning in homework assignments, projects, things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. The annotation feature, like you can actually write, here's what I was trying to do with this code, right? You can like see where the thought process is much more easily.
Cool. All right. So I feel like we've covered a ton about the kind of basics of Python for data science, exactly what you would need to download, how much you would need to know to, kind of apply to a data science boot camp, and even got to talk a little bit about libraries and IDEs. So what are your favorite learning resources for someone who is a complete beginner in Python or in data science?
I mean, if you are a complete beginner and you want to learn about Python, at Metis, we have a course called Python for Beginners. It's literally written for people who have never seen Python before. So that course basically starts with what is Python, and then we'll go through and teach you the various different fundamentals. Once you've got a little bit of Python fundamentals down, we have another course called Beginner Python and Math for Data Science. So if you're pretty sure you want to align your career with data science, but you're not quite ready to take the boot camp, this would be a nice course to brush up on both Python and math, specifically as it pertains to data science. And then, of course, there's the immersive boot camp with me as an instructor, which is going to be all the machine learning stuff, the visualizations, all of those things. We cover those. And the last thing about the Metis resources, I just wanted to flag for people. We actually have an Intro to Python video from our Demystifying Data Science 2019 conference. I'm actually the instructor in that video, so you could check that out. That is free. You can kind of see, is Python something you want to know more about through that video? The last two learning resources I have here are really for practicing Python. So that's where you're really going to start making gains. The more you practice, the better you're going to get. So the first one, called Check.io, is kind of a gamified way to learn Python. So you'll be completing challenges and progressing along this little game board, and you're actually trying to make it into a game and solve different challenges along the way. And then the other one I have listed here, Coding Bat, just has a ton of different practice problems. So if you are looking just to practice, that's another great spot.
Those are super helpful. And I know, since the last time we spoke, you actually launched a series of YouTube videos. So would those be good resources for beginners?
Yeah. I did launch a YouTube series. My YouTube series is just about Intro to Seaborn, which is one of those visualization packages. So if you are to the level where you know a little bit of Python, but you are wanting to start visualizing data, that could be a potential resource as well.
That's one of the most interesting parts of data science anyways, the data visualization. So cool. Okay, well, we'll put a link to those YouTube videos as well. And just so that we know, how far does that Python for Beginners class at Metis get you? Is that basically if you take that as a beginner, would you be ready to apply to Metis right after you finish?
Yeah, so that Python for Beginners course will really kind of launch your journey. So we'll start with just what is Python, right? Getting everybody comfortable with programming in general. So you might not have programmed in any language before this course. Then we'll talk about data types, which actually is a really important concept. You really have to have that before you can move on. And then we go through each of those three core foundations, the conditionals, the loops, and the functions that we talked about earlier. All of those are included in the course. Really thinking about Python for Beginners as kind of launching your journey. And then you might want to, of course, explore more math or even more Python before taking an immersive course.
Cool. And thanks for mentioning that Demystifying Data Science conference. I feel like that has so many, obviously the Intro to Python video and other educational resources, but also just if you're curious about what the actual day-to-day is like and what people are doing on the job, there are a ton of really cool talks there. I remember watching that last year. So wonderful. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to add, Kim? We covered a ton here, but anything that we skipped over?
Yeah, I would just say, sometimes beginners can get a little frustrated, they want to, automatically be excellent at Python. It's just going to take practice. It's really about every single day getting just a little bit better. And, maybe you're not solving everything right from the beginning, but just getting incrementally better. And, I think as long as you're willing to put in the work to just get a little bit better every day, you're going to be off to a great start with Python.
That is such good advice. Well, thank you so much to you, Kim, for joining us. I feel like I learned a lot about how Python is used in data science and how much Python you would need to start at a coding bootcamp. So we will post a recording and a transcript of this webinar on our blog soon. And we will include this contact information for Kim and Metis on this slide here. And thanks so much to all of you for watching and learning. You can tweet at us and email us and let us know which topic you'd like to see us cover on our next course report webinar. Thanks, Kim.